Yep.
Okay, cool. Good signal.
Okay, so we are now live. Okay, so we'll get started. So first of all, I want to welcome everyone to the 8th lecture in our LTU College of Architecture and Design virtual lecture series. My name is Emily Cudel, and I'm happy to introduce tonight's lecture on behalf of the Lectures and Exhibitions Committee. First, a bit about our college. The College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Tech offers degrees in architecture, interior design, graphic design, game art, transportation design, industrial design, and urban design. It is dedicated to the pedagogy of theory and practice, the original model of Lawrence Tech University, advocating not one or the other, but both, integrated and coherent. Today, we will be hearing a lecture titled The City as Campus, the University as Urban Generator by our own Anirban Adya. Anirban teaches integrated design, urban theory, and research methods, and coordinates the Master of Architecture thesis program. His research focuses on sustainability as ecology, with emphasis on well-being and social ethics in places. His scholarship integrates theories and practices of sustainable placemaking and everyday urbanism. His work illustrates interdisciplinary approaches to critical questions of the public realm. Tonight, Anirban will share his sabbatical research completed in the spring of 2019, in which he undertook a case study of university-driven urban development using Buffalo, New York as a test case. The project highlights the role of institutions as stabilizer, developer, and service provider in the context of diminishing resources and increasing competition. Campuses are found as the ecology of diverse actors, individuals, groups, private and public actors, creating a dynamic landscape for innovative, efficient, and responsive urban development. So thank you so much, Anirban. And now I'm gonna just transfer the screen sharing to you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I want to share part of my work, as Emily said, which was conducted during 2009, between January and April, spring of 2009. And sabbatical was an opportunity for me to engage in some urban design work from my background, but test out certain methods and predominantly mapping analysis, observation, using a place-based case study, an opportunity that we typically don't get during a regular semester. So from an urban design background, my recent interest has been to look at urban excellence, defining it, understanding it in different types of cities, cities that are doing well, cities which are negotiating transition, cities as well as cities in decline. And one common thing that I started to look at, especially outside kind of the big, large metropolitan development, is successful cities which are in small to medium metro areas had certain elements in common. And one of the primary elements that came out in many literature review, many background research, is a university. University as an integrated part of the urban core of an active downtown with many able-bodied young population, different diversity, cultural diversity, looking at different types of economic drivers. So the university became a focus of a study towards looking at how it contributes and serves a city, not just as a side community, but as the primary economic engine and primary urban generator. Some of the other elements that are highlighted in similar studies are state capitals, medical facilities, elements which provide a very niche market and bring diverse work group in cities. And so the university was, again, one very specific case of a niche market and providing very strategic and sometimes, as we will see, idiosyncratic dynamic of different actors within the city. So looking at the city and its relationship with the universities, and also in search for a city within a small metropolitan region, the search led to Buffalo, New York, with my previous association while working there and doing my master's, but also looking at Buffalo, New York as a city that has been in constant decline with some recent stabilization right after 1920s, and especially after the World War in 1950s. So as the city still grapples with change in its economic structure, trying to manage out-migration, suburban sprawl, there are also cycles and in pockets of resilience, of adaptability, of stabilization of the population, and in some ways, growth. And the university and the university-driven initiatives through a regional institute, through a new medical campus next to the downtown, provided some opportunity to look at a community and a city in transition where the university plays a very specific role. So I'm thankful for the opportunity that I received, hosted by Dean Robert Shibley and Professor Schneeklat at the school, but also the Regional Institute, Brad Shahabi and his expertise, and some contact with the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, who played an important role in the university and the UB Foundation partnership with the nonprofit organization BNMC, as well as Chris Hawley from the City Hall. And I must also thank Millen Noel. I don't know if she is in the audience, but she was critical in working with me after the sabbatical in some analysis and running some test models. I must also thank the college administration and the university for allowing me to change some of the time schedule and providing me the flexibility and allowing me to go into the sabbatical. So before we move to Buffalo, roots of this thinking and looking at university as a generator comes from my PhD work, and my doctoral dissertation was focused on 4 university towns in the United States, looking at public spaces. But looking back at that study and some of its impact in conferences and in discussions with people in practice as well as public policy, these 2 cities are 2 examples, 2 very small places. Broome in New York, known for its university-driven community college, the SUNY System Community College, and Trelawney, Jamaica, where the University of Technology play a significant role in the community and its development and its growth. And in discussions with the SUNY system and the president of SUNY Broome, who was interested in my work, and they were talking about how how the university can contribute towards stabilization of a declining population. And in case of Jamaica, the discussion was looking at the university, how it could become not just an educational institution or community organization, but very specifically an engine for economic growth. Of course, through employment, but also diversifying it towards design thinking, innovation, bringing and new partnerships with new employment opportunities, renewable energy, so on and so forth. So that led to my thinking about a significant second phenomenon that is currently undergoing for some time in United States, again, with the focus of outside large metropolitan areas and kind of outside the 14 cities which have population beyond 1 million people, to focus on the notion of second cities. And second cities, or especially the smaller second cities is defined by cities which have, it's a long range, population of 100,000 to 1 million people. But there are a lot of literature shows that kind of the next wave of growth and its attractiveness for millennials and Gen Zs for different kind of opportunities are in these smaller metropolitan areas. So combined with this notion of the second cities, which immediately becomes complicated with this wide range of population growth, but also the notion of legacy communities, which are typically older communities with industrial core, which are declining. The economy is still transitioning, negotiating the movement from manufacturing-based industries to something else, alternate manufacturing, other kinds of very specific niche markets like research, life sciences, biomedical, medicine. And a lot of these communities, as pointed out by Brookings and a lot of other newspaper op-eds, we are seeing that they are struggling with coping with this kind of knowledge scale and the global reach. And also with public policy, traditional public policies and traditional focus on economic growth, a lot of outmigration and kind of struggling with the old fiscal model. And ultimately, the social divide, racial segregation, difficult situation for minority communities are still part and parcel of these legacy communities. So Buffalo, New York becomes an important part in that because it's one of those small scale second cities, but it's also one of the prime example of legacy communities. And you can see with current population of around 250,000, good diverse mix of population demographics. We are seeing though very specific pockets of growth and stabilization, but the city is continuing to struggle as it stabilizes with the manufacturing core and its decline, managing its different new industrial development trajectories. New kinds of automakers like Tesla recently moved in, focused on renewable energy with wind using the lakeshore. But it has a constant struggle of identity, constant struggle of looking into different infrastructural development, how to manage historic infrastructure of the Erie Canal, infrastructure connected to steel industry, grain elevators, struggles with historic adaptive reuse. But also there is hope, right? Like I mentioned a couple of times about stabilization of the population in pockets, development of urban campuses and districts where I'm going to go in detail about that. The university and its partnerships are taking important role. New economies, setups, and entrepreneurship. A small-scale alternate industrial production from breweries, industrial arts and crafts, university partnerships with nonprofits which are based in these communities. New political structure where minorities are getting involvement, and then the university and its relationship with the downtown, preservation, adaptive reuse, and very strategic infill development. So looking at the city and the primary university campuses, the traditional historic campus is the South Campus, which was the Erie County Mental Health Hospital originally. That still provides service to some of the schools and colleges. The UB North Campus, which is outside the city of Buffalo in Amherst, North analogous town, is the campus developed in late 50s, early 60s, as a push from creating a comprehensive campus outside the city. But more recently, the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus next to downtown, along with some important districts within the city, is the most recent addition and most recent initiative by the university in the city to move a series of departments and colleges, the Medical and Biomedical Research Center, the Medical College itself, UB Downtown Partnerships, educational opportunity initiatives, has created from 2013, specifically for the last 7 years, as a very specific focus on campus development in downtown. And that has created a very interesting opportunity within the social structure. And you can see a dot density map of the city divided into ethnicity. And you can see the main street is almost like Detroit's 8th Mile as that divide between predominantly African-American east side of downtown as well as the city proper, and predominantly white, the western side, which also has a strong Hispanic community, which we are seeing kind of the yellow mustard color beyond Allentown. Fruit Belt, which is on the east side of the medical campus, as a historic African-American community, which has very serious stake in the development of the medical campus for jobs, connection with the residential communities, service and infrastructure provisions, and also importantly downtown, which has seen huge investments, both in terms of public infrastructure, facilities, recreation district, but also downtown as a living quarter, neighborhood development, if we think about downtown as a neighborhood. So the BNMC, or the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, which becomes the test case, is at that spatial as well as kind of the social junction of these other neighborhoods. And so as we see this as a single campus, but as a connection point of 4 neighborhoods, the BNMC itself as a neighborhood, Allentown on the west as a historic neighborhood, but more recent development and investment as an artistic community, LGBTQ community, with a lot of young population. Talked about on the east side, the Fruit Belt as a historic African-American population, continuously growing older. But in the midst, we have this medical center, Center for Life Science Research, Center for University of Buffalo's connection, new investments and infill developments to create innovation and entrepreneurship. And you can see the blue dots of the university facilities and the footprints. But overall, 120 acres of area, around 20,000 people coming there to work every day. Most of the campus is medical facilities building, the light blue, like probably a group of 30, 35 medical groups, consultants, medical service providers. But though with disproportionate and sometimes smaller footprint of the campus, the northmost blue dot is the medical school, and the 2 blue dots towards the south are the downtown partnerships, and the UB Gateway Center and the Educational Opportunity Center play a very significant role in partnership with this magenta dot in the middle, which is the Innovation Center owned and run by a nonprofit organization with the same namesake of the campus itself, Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus. But together it has seen in the last 10 years, $1.4 billion of investment, growth of almost 100% increase in floor space area from 4.5 million square foot to 9 million square foot. But this is the view that I had during my study working from the UB Gateway And it's an important view to look at the different actors and kind of the network of the medical facilities, almost collection of the economic and medical research giants, from bioinformatics and life sciences, genetics, the Children's Hospital, Buffalo General Hospital, and Roswell Cancer Research being there for a long time. But more recent addition of the UB Medical School, the Innovation Center owned by the BNMC that talked about, but also remnants of some old school retail, the Ulrich's Tavern. And all of these things play an important role, as I hope to show through some analysis and through some narrative, that how they create an ecology of different relationships between these medical groups and the commercial medical corporations, the campus, and these kind of small scale historic retails and new innovation center. But what also is paramount in and significant in the view is what's in the foreground and this huge property of the parking lot. And what's interesting is that in terms of kind of the stakeholder dynamics and the dynamics among the actors, that the small nonprofit, the BNMC, owns the parking lot, and that helps them bring them to the table as an important controller of an infrastructure that everybody wants. So in terms of just building ownership, if we look at the university and the University Foundation, who has the relationship with the BNMC, the nonprofit, on the left-hand side, we see just the building footprint and the ownership, the dark blue being the university campus, and the magenta being the university partnership with BNMC, the nonprofit UB Connection. But we start to see that in relationship to the other footprint of the medical corporations, the dialogue is through this control of open spaces, control of infrastructure, very specific to transportation, in this case, parking predominantly. So this is kind of a side story, but this is an interesting narrative of ownership versus control that fuels some of the dynamic actions and the city making process or the campus making process in the context, in the physical context. The physical context is also about the Ellicott Street, which is highlighted in the middle, which is in some way the central spine of the campus, and how it becomes a very important series of nodes with connections, direct physical and accessibility corridors with the two neighborhoods on two sides, Allentown and Fruit Belt, bringing the communities and the community-related facilities into Ellicott Street, and also Ellicott Street continues toward the downtown. So the concentration of the medical school, the BNMC campus, and that intersection of the nonprofit, the retail, that block, starts to become a de facto center within that spine, and is central in terms of driving the notion of a single campus and its ambience. So from the city scale, if we come to the understanding of the campus itself and its dynamics, and then moving on to the next scale of the street and the spine, we are seeing new focus and new development during the last couple of years during my project on infrastructural development of streetscape, environmental focus in terms of stormwater infrastructure change, rainwater collection, to address the parking issues, but also moving towards non-motorized transportation, using the spine, using it as a bike corridor, but also bringing public transit, which a lot of the investments and work is on the way. So this is a project undergoing with the university in partnership with Scape Studio, which is a landscape and urban design firm. who are looking at pedestrian movement, public transit, and you can see the different seasons during the summer, and on the right, mostly during my visit. Kind of a nondescript street, but it becomes, as we go into a more careful block level study with the buildings, with the spaces and the activities there, we start to see how the spine starts to occupy an important place in connecting different parts of the campus and providing different ways of physical access as well as visual access. So using space syntax methodology, which was developed in University College London, I did some quick mapping of kind of a base map and looking into kind of the historic footprint of a lot of industrial manufacturing industries like the Trico plant, which is a series of 10 buildings, almost a huge manufacturing complex, completely abandoned, and an ongoing discussion of adaptive reuse, to the Innovation Center, which is partly adaptive reuse, part infill building, historic preservation work of the Ulrich's Tavern, which is kind of the old pub and tavern, being the only retail spot as everything around it changes, but still somehow maintains itself and is vital in being an attractor and place of gathering and meetings for the campus, to the different medical research institutes that form kind of a core of this spine. So looking at some of the physical properties of access, the street intersections and the nodes, and also looking at the visual corridor opportunities, the visibility opportunities is provide, we start to see that the specific block, kind of the only mixed use block still existing in the campus, with an old historic building, historic preserved, old retail, and a new innovation center, is either a center of a kind of collection of the physical hotspot areas, which is in the top diagram, looking into analysis of physical connections through spaces, and right next to an areas of more visual connection through different parts of the community, different parts of the campus. So that starts to highlight the importance of the spine itself and the series of the nodes and the opportunities it provides. And it's further studies and possible further case studies to look at very specific facade properties and details in the facade in terms of openings, whether it's the openings for physical access through doors and gateways, openings in terms of visual access at the street level and upper level. So a lot of these kind of methodological tactics of deconstructing the elevations, deconstructing the physical container along this spine started to overlap and started to provide a fundamental framework to bring a lot of these layers together, whether we are looking at the space of the street itself, the adjacent properties of the street corridor and the street wall, land uses like parking or green open spaces, different abilities and network connections of movement and visibility. And that leads to this kind of very phased understanding of as somebody walks from the southern end to the northern end, from right to left, how these different opportunities of spatial connection and visual connections can be interrelated. So at the street level, this kind of test models could become important to reinforce the vitality of an historic street like Ellicott Street, which has changed so much, and an argument that we need more specific study and probably very strategic development of the mixed-use block, like we see with the Innovation Center, the Adaptive Reuse, and the Tavern. So that block itself became the next scale of study in a more detailed, more specific anthropological studies of very specific observation of the land uses, but also how people use these spaces. So you can see the overall elevation of the block, the trico plant on the left, as a ongoing project between Preservation Buffalo Niagara, BNMC, and the university to some extent, as a mixed-use project of housing, hotel, and a little bit controversial project also in terms of what needs to be preserved and what can be demolished if it can be in a nationally registered, historic registered building, but is not designated as a local historic marker. Right next to BNMC, the Innovation Center, who owns a large part of the block and has very specific interest in development of the adaptive reuse. And on the right, you have that small footprint of the tavern. So some of the next phases were looking into the historic development of the block itself and analyzing some of its fine grain, looking at the 1940s Sanborn, where you can see the block marked in black on the left bottom, to its, so this block here, in a predominantly residential neighborhood, which completely changed during the 60s and 70s with the medical campus development and a huge aspiration of big footprint of medical campus development. But we can see the very focused but not so uniform recent implementation with lack of investments and lack of growth in the downtown, that the 2010 master plan has only been implemented in very specific pockets. But the implementation has been significant, but we can see that the block itself has remained stable, specifically with the Innovation Center and the historic retail as a remnant in one corner. So looking at this kind of a historic formal study, the tavern itself provides an opportunity to look at some work in Buffalo highlighted by Klinkenberg's work on The Last Fine Time, where he looked at the old First Ward, which is an old historic neighborhood next to the grain elevators at the foot of the Erie Canal, but brings out this possibility of kind of an archival neighborhood evolution study where everything around some of these institutions, historic retail institutions, have changed and grown. But they have remained, in case of George and Eddie's in Last Fine Time, that was sold and it was demolished. But there are lessons here where some of these historic retail structures become functional and adapt themselves with the changing time and become a core component of the evolution of the campus. So we see today that a small footprint of the retail becomes kind of a meeting areas for the people coming and using the Innovation Center, gathering space, and informal meeting areas for the huge group of medical corporate groups around, and play a very important role in sustaining this block and keeping this block relevant and keeping this block from getting demolished and replaced by a big footprint of new infill development. So the last part, I want to show some quick studies of observation and mapping and looking into kind of very specific, not focused on the place or the physical qualities, but use of these spaces by people. And the time in Buffalo offered me some opportunity of looking back at very traditional observation tactics of people's observation, sketching at different points of time, and inspired by some artistic work by urban artists like Larissa Fassler, for example, who has worked in Berlin on understanding public spaces and mapping people's behavior, their movement in an artistic way, to bring these observations and capturing them using a lot of the base maps and more digital model-based technologies, where we start to understand the life of the block itself. So these different scales and different testing of different tactics and different scales of mapping at the city scale, looking at the campus and its street and its organization, and then moving into resolution of the block and understanding movement of people throughout different time period, looking at interaction of people, whether formal and informal communication, visibility analysis, and looking at the land use and the spatial characters itself, provide us with an opportunity to understand the block and its life and its changing life in very specific ways. And hopefully provide us with some opportunities of thinking about generative proposals for the campus as it develops as a historic community, as its neighborhood, but the university and its partnerships finding new footprints and new grounds. So in terms of kind of the next steps and future direction of this research, and going back to the notion of urban excellence, there are possible opportunities of collaboration too, specifically one at a national scale in discussion with the Rudy Brunner Foundation, who runs a competition every other year on, it's a place-based competition where they recognize places with urban excellence based on their narratives and the stories, the people and the processes. And I'm in discussion with them to create a more space and design-based understanding of their case studies nationally, to look at ways to provide quantitative and qualitative variables and criteria to define and frame what they mean by urban excellence. And the second is with international partnership with Politecnico di Torino that our college has, to engage in some international case studies of university-driven as well as kind of niche urban economy-driven possibilities of growth that we can look at different ways of understanding university case studies, but also successful tactics in very small or medium scale metro regions, which are either stabilizing or still shrinking and declining. Thank you. Emily, you want me to stop share or leave it on screen? And if there is any discussion or questions, I'd love to take.
Yeah, maybe we stop sharing first so we can just see each other, and then if we want, we can look back at slides if people have specific questions. So maybe I'll start us off. Anirban, thank you so much for this talk. It was really nice to get to know more about your own research, and also nice to see this analysis of a space that's really familiar to me. I was thinking a lot about power as you were talking about, which I think you kind of led with in terms of the situation of the small nonprofit that controls a bunch of land that is where parking happens on that campus, and that has sort of given them more leverage, right, within the kind of sphere of actors on this campus. And also thinking about how the block that you focused on, where you were finding more dynamic spatial relationships, more dynamic patterns of movement, was also a block in which power was more decentralized among several institutions instead of kind of consolidated with the one sort of actor of the medical campus. And so I was wondering how you're thinking about power sort of after having done this study, if you see a kind of shift in power relationships being necessary for better development of this campus or campuses like it, and how that might happen.
Yeah, I think, that block itself and BNMC, Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, as a physical campus, but also as the consortium of these different actors, is an example in terms, if we think it as an example of power structure or power dynamic, it's an example where it's about checks and balances. And I think you probably know with history in Buffalo that they have gone through painstaking processes of failures and projects getting killed. Even recently, that parking lot, as well as the housing, the McCarley Gardens housing, which I didn't mention, but which was right next to it, it's affordable housing, stable housing. For a long time, there had been discussions of selling these two properties to the university or a university nonprofit partnerships for bigger campus developments. And that got halted into the ground because of, again, political divisions. The housing was owned by a church group, and initially they wanted to sell and they didn't. I think that BNMC as a nonprofit, which in an interesting way assumes the same name of the campus, it's kind of an old politicking strategy, has an important seat in the table. But I think the university, which I'm interested in as its implication on the spaces, plays an important role of the negotiator between these different actors. And so though the university was not able to use these two properties to a more comprehensive development, I think ultimately this checks and balance relationship between these different actors created a complex, a lot of times frustrating power dynamic, but it also helped to save and sustain that block. So it was kind of a product and outcome of a severe, unhappy compromise where the nonprofit was forced to go in that with a very specific infill development. They had to maintain and keep that retail. The fight with the adaptive reuse is still going on. But I think it's central to the vitality of the campus in general. And otherwise, it becomes kind of a big footprint towers in the park with no street life. And it's a direct outcome of that messy power structure.
Thank you. So feel free, folks who are watching right now, feel free to post your questions in the chat. Folks on YouTube, you're also welcome to post questions in the chat on YouTube. Might take a minute to get people warmed up.
Students have any question? I see Luke, Jeremy.
Yeah, we were all on IE4 and you were a lab instructor last semester, so we were just appreciative of like the methods you used to analyze buffalo. You shared with us last semester, and we were able to use in our field work. So I guess we're appreciative of that, and we were happy to see some of the strategies reflected in our work, like depth map, like other strategies. So we're here, excited to see it.
Hey, Anubhav.
Hey,
So that wasn't, and Luke, that wasn't a question, that was a statement, but it's always nice to be appreciated, right? So it was really interesting to see the analysis of the street walls. Can you just talk about how that impacted some of the outcomes? Because it was also curious to me that it didn't get activated in terms of internal versus external visibility. It seemed to be a pretty lo-fi pass at the idea of opening. But is there, when you moved into the second and third levels of the research in this, did some of those nuances come out, and did they start to have an effect on the way that the overall outcomes came through what you learned through how some of those spaces, and then maybe that's a generic question, but I'm really interested to know how we start to not look at general patterns, but maybe some unique compositions, how certain things came together. Do they activate in a particular way, and they're, in some ways they do become sort of a secondary typology. They become something that can get reproduced, but there are things that emerged right out of a set of conditions that we would never actually design in that way. Things that were unexpected.
yeah, let me quickly share my screen and go through some of the slides at those different scales. So, and you can see it, right? I'm not making it a presentation mode. So, at this scale, it's pretty broad, and I think at this scale, it provides an opportunity to see the potential of the campus itself, where Delicate Street, which is the black spine in the middle, in terms of, this is just looking at right now kind of the street morphology and the land uses and adjacency of the neighborhoods, that it has potential of becoming connecting streets within the campus, but also from the kind of a perpendicular direction, becoming an important connector for the two neighborhoods. And here, I think it's the aspiration of two neighborhoods on two sides of the town with very different history, very different economic capacity, with more recent investment, has some opportunity of dialogue, which traditionally have been in conflict. But you're right that this is a pretty low-level pass. We are completely away and just looking at physical connection, talking about possible opportunities. So when we come to the street level, more start to see the fine grain here, more specific kind of building level land use studies. So where Allentown hits. Sorry, I'm off. Yeah, so where we are seeing here, where the Allentown hits, where actually the university building went in, which also housed subway station in its basement. So that became an opportunity. Now, what we saw previously, just a spatial opportunity of connecting the two neighborhoods, that becomes a center to, in a very pragmatic infrastructural way, connect Allentown and the Fruit Belt, very two divergent neighborhoods, through kind of everyday urban here, transportation infrastructure oriented facility, providing a place where they can interact. And with the subway station came retail. Now, when we come to the street, I mean, it gets into much more finer detail, but here, I think the problem is nothing much has happened yet. I think the opportunity is that to continue this desire where the open space is there and they have invested in the landscape and the infrastructure itself. Other than this block, we are seeing the street wall, right? That was saved and has been able to sustain to a large extent. Other than that, if you see around, it's parking lots and the buildings which are away. So I think these more specific studies you can look at, I mean, other than that, the street wall presence is very weak. So that pattern of the street wall on the left-hand side, something can start to bring more activities, which the movement analysis, and if we start to look at this more carefully, which I have not done, is we may have to look at more cross sections of the street, not section along and look at the elevation, but cut section through the building, through the retail or through the innovation center, and bring the doors or windows in more fine-grained study of whether it's window sill height and what materials. And yes, there is an opening, but am I able to see being inside the innovation center to the street? But right now, what practically happens is you can see these people. I mean, it's the retail, people come, have a drink or get a coffee, and they smoke. And the street wall and the presence of the retail, the people who are coming to work there, and that kind of a messy block allows that kind of everyday space and vitality with the sidewalk, which is, I mean, can be replicated in some way in the other blocks or in some other places for providing, if we generalize it, opportunities of everyday activities.
Thanks. Emily did ask my question. I wanted to ask about power, but whatever.
I see a question in the chat from Paul. Sorry, Paul, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Paul Josen. He asked, and did those stories align with what you were observing / measuring? Paul, can you give us a little bit more clarification about what stories you're referring to? There's a little lag in the YouTube, so it may take him a minute to actually clarify that question. We have a message coming in via carrier pigeon. Okay, so here's the kind of first part of that question, which I think got cut off. So he's asking, how did you gather stories on the ground? What were your methods? And did those stories align with what you were observing and measuring?
Yeah, so the primary methods of collecting the stories was interviews and meeting with different groups of people. One specific source was the University of Buffalo Regional Institute, which houses also the Urban Design Project. Bob Shibley, Linda Schneeklot, Brad Shahavi, they have been working with kind of historic memory of series of projects off-campus development, working with BNMC, working with McCarley Gardens, which is the housing next to the parking lot. And so there were structured interviews, there were unstructured and informal conversations while driving in car, and as some of them were showing me important investments and new development. I did have some structured meetings with BNMC and their leadership, their director, Mark and Stintz. They have their own kind of planning arm, so they're planners. So this was kind of from the nonprofit and the campus point of view. Chris Hawley, who is a historian and works for the City Hall, was very instrumental in talking to me and sharing maps and plans and the documents. The other side of the methodology was talking to the church groups and who owns a significant part of. Going back to this map, this area, so this part, this is the housing, McCarley Gardens, two-story affordable housing, and kind of the contentious property along with the parking lot. And so meeting with the church groups and their struggle as part of the Fruit Belt to live in some way in the shadow of a kind of a giant medical campus, but also being instrumental to bring kind of a grassroots power to development of Michigan Avenue on the other side, which I didn't talk about much. And development of their retail infrastructure with kind of a shared investment from the campus. So the primary methodology to get these narratives were structured and unstructured meetings, interviews, and some of them in specific moments, specific to the block, was complemented with naturalistic observations, some videos and audio recordings of people's movements and behavior and use of the spaces. I hope it answers to some extent the question about the tactics.
Oh, sorry, I'm unmuted. Other questions on Zoom or on YouTube?
Yeah, and to also go back to this question about the methodology and how it aligns, I'm interested in the power structure and its dynamics and different methods to capture the stories. But I'm also interested in, to some extent, what Philip was asking is the physical outcome and impact physically and spatially on the campus that is tangible and we can see. So I think that relationship, what we are finding in the stories and interviews, and how does that show up in projects getting killed and the parking lot remaining as an important open space in the campus, or the stories that we are hearing about the power dynamics and that mixed use block in a messy way is still existing. So this certain developments going in or absence of development, but that physical impact and the spatial outcome is something I'm interested as a variable, which I believe has some patterns or typology embodies these power dynamics, right? So the social, political, cultural narrative is entrenched and embedded in the very tangible spatial and physical patterns, objects.
Thank you. So if we don't have any other questions, feel free to jump in, anyone, if you've been waiting. If we don't have any other questions, I think we'll conclude. So thank you so much, Anirban. This has been a great talk, and again, super enjoyable to learn more about your work. So thanks for spending this time. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emily, for coordinating.
And have a great night.
Thanks. Bye.